Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. So first of all, thank you all so much for joining tonight. So tonight, we'll try to make it as interactive as possible. So we'll try to explore a framework that will help us understand how adding Krishna in our lives can transform difficulties into blessings. We will also explore topics such as, are material desires always bad, and so on. So we will explore pastimes from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and also look at Srila Prabhupada's life a little bit. And so when I present the framework today, please try to pay attention, as in the end, you will all get an opportunity to visit several pastimes from Srimad Bhagavatam and understand the framework that is presented here today. So it will be a very practical and applied session. So feel free to ask questions by unmuting anytime. And if I cannot finish the material today, we can continue next week as well. So with that, I would like to offer my obeisances and respects to all the gurus who I really admire and who have really helped me in my life. Guru Maharaj, Radhanath Swami Maharaj, Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, Shamanand Prabhu, and I have deep regard and respect for Her Grace Amritna Mataji also, who's shown me how to lead a life of devotion, actually. So with that, I just want to get started on this topic, how Krishna transforms difficulties into blessings. So what does distress actually mean? So let's look at it from 4 levels. So when the Lord is actually in distress, the Lord's parents are in distress, pure devotees are in distress, and finally we'll come down to our level when we are in distress. How do we respond? So in each of these cases, we look at how, for example, in the first case, the Lord is going to respond in distress, and so on. So Srimad Bhagavatam does not just deal with why bad things happen to good people. In fact, it deals with what do good people do when bad things happen to them? What do good people do when bad things happen to them? So first, when Lord is apparently in distress, what does the Lord do? So this is, so Kartik month is coming very soon, October 9th, I believe. So here we see the Lord apparently in distress. So what does the Lord do? So in the Damodar Ashtakam verse, we see Kuver Atmajau Baddha Mrityaiva Yadvat Tvaya Mochitau Bhakti Bhajo Kritaucha. So what is happening here is that even though the Lord was bound, he liberates those who are bound. So this shows the merciful nature of the Lord. The Lord is so merciful that even in apparent distress, he's thinking about the topmost welfare of his devotees. So shouldn't the reverse also be true? In our distressed state, shouldn't we think of the Lord? But do we? Is it always practical to think of the Lord when we are in difficult situations? Why can't we remember the Lord in distress? What is the obstacle? And what can we do to remember the Lord when in distress? So these are topics that we will explore. Anyway, the point is that even though the Lord was bound, he liberates those who are bound. So the first section that I want to talk about is the Lord's parents in distress. Can anyone please unmute and say who's this divine couple? Anybody?
Sachi Devi and Jagannath Mishra.
Yeah, Sachi Devi and Jagannath Mishra. So now I'm going to quote a verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela, chapter 13, text 72. So here the verse goes like this: Apatya virehe mishrera dukki hai lamana putra lagi aradila vishnura charana. So apatya virahe, in separation of not having children, who? Mishrera. Mishrera is the Mishras, Jagannath Mishra, Sachi Mishra. Dukki Hailamana, they were in distress because just before this verse, it is stated that they lost 8 daughters, not one, not two, but 8 daughters, one after another. But in spite of this, Aradila Vishnura Charana, Putra Lagi Aradila Vishnura Charana. So in spite of this, in spite of having lost 8 daughters, one after another, they are still worshipping Lord Vishnu with intensity. So a similar parallel can be drawn from Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda, Devaki and Vasudev, also because they were also in distress. They also lost children. So how do we understand this? So, and what were they doing when they were losing, when they were in distress? They were thinking of the Lord all the time, just like how the Lord was thinking of the devotee when he was bound. The parents of the Lord are also thinking of the Lord when they were in distress. So now how do we understand this? So in those days, coming back to Jagannath Mishra and Sachi Mata, the circumstantial explanation is that you can say infant mortality rate was very high then. But the transcendental explanation is that to gain the Lord as the child, they had to undergo sufferings like Devaki and Vasudeva. So the lesson for us is that to do a great service, great sacrifice is needed. Even in the case of Srila Prabhupada, we see that he offered a great service, but he underwent a lot of great sacrifices. It is said in Bhagavad Gita, Bhajante mam drida vritaha. So in 728, I believe, it is said that one has to be completely determined and one has to undergo severe sacrifices in order to do great sacrifices. Even in Srila Prabhupada's life, from 1922 to 1966, Srila Prabhupada went through a lot of difficulties, a lot of failures, a lot of sacrifices. But in the end, that service was granted to Srila Prabhupada. So now coming back to this particular pastime of Jagannath Mishra and Sachi Devi. So as I mentioned before, they lost 8 daughters. But in spite of losing 8 daughters, what did they do? They worshiped Krishna with increased earnestness, as we saw. And then as the pastime continues, they got a glorious son like Vishwarupa, not Vishwambar, Vishwarupa, who's Baladev. As soon as they got this glorious son, they increased their devotion to Krishna. So this is actually a test that if we get our desires fulfilled, after the desires are fulfilled, do we increase our devotion to Krishna or not? So the verse goes like this. So this is the first verse that I read. So this comes a few verses later. Adi Leela, chapter 13, verse 79, I believe. Putra pana dampati haila anandita mana visheshe sevana kare govinda charana. So as I mentioned before, so even after the child was born, they intensified their devotion to Krishna. So you see here, Aradila Vishnura Charana, and then Vishesha Sevana Kare Govinda Charana. So this is an example of the the Lord's parents when they were in distress. So now you might argue and say, okay, but they were desiring a child. Isn't this a material desire? Is that okay? So these are some questions that might come. So for that, we'll address this topic a little bit here. Are material desires necessarily bad? So desire is less important than the motivation behind the desire. So motivation is more concerned with attitude than desire. So what we desire is not as important as why we desire. Srila Prabhupada desired to have big lands, big apartments, and so on for the sake of service to Lord Krishna. So more than the desire is why we want to have that desire. So does that mean that it is okay to practice bhakti for worldly desires? So that means, can we have worldly desires and still practice bhakti? So there are three levels here. So practicing bhakti for worldly desires. The problem is we have a tendency to give up bhakti once the desire is fulfilled. Or we give up if the desire is not fulfilled also. And what is even more interesting is, many times when we have the worldly desires as our focus, we replace it with something else that promises to fulfill that desire. For example, demigod worship or something. As long as we get that promise that if you follow this path, your worldly desires will be fulfilled, we tend to do that. So this is a risk of practicing bhakti for worldly desires. Now there are two things here. So there is Ananya Bhakti and there is Ahaituki Bhakti. So Ananya Bhakti is exclusive devotion to Krishna. The Krishna is the object in this case, and no matter what happens, that object will not change. Now, Ahaituki Bhakti means bhakti, but without any attachment, without any motivation, without any attachment to the desires. So what is the difference? So the Acharyas have explained that Ananya Bhakti is way more important than Ahaituki Bhakti, because in Ahaituki Bhakti, the focus is on the desires. So not having any expectations, not having any desires. But in Ananya Bhakti, the focus is on the object of bhakti itself, wherein we establish that connection with Krishna and not on the focus is not on the object or not on what we get from Krishna. I hope that is clear. So now, with that as a background, so it is often said that just practice bhakti seriously. Of course, this famous verse is there, akama sarva kamova, moksha kama udaradi, tivrena bhakti yogena yajete purusha param. So in this verse, it is said, so bhakti and material desires. So we could be practicing bhakti for material desires. We could be practicing bhakti with material desires, and we could be practicing bhakti on material desires. Now, what does this mean? So here, let's go one by one. We could be practicing bhakti for material desires. Now, this is what I explained in the previous slide. If we practice bhakti for material desires, we run the risk of stopping the practice of bhakti as soon as the material desire is fulfilled. We run the risk of stopping the practice of bhakti if it is not fulfilled, and we run the risk of replacing bhakti with some other, replacing our object of bhakti with someone else or something, some other path, if we find a better option. So that is the risk of working for material desires, where the focus is the material desires themselves, nothing else. Focus is not Krishna, focus is material desires. Now, the second one is actually a very important one, and most of us, I think, belong in this particular category. So we are practicing bhakti with material desires. What does this mean? Is it okay to do that, first of all? So yes, it is okay, because eventually bhakti purifies those material desires. So what does this mean? Material desires, right? So here, even though we understand that we have material desires, our purpose is not those material desires. Our purpose is Krishna. So now let's take some examples to illustrate this point. So if you tell a Brahmana that your love for reading or teaching is a material desire, give it up. If you tell a Brahmana that, it will choke him to death actually, because for him, his psychophysical nature leads him to read, and now if we ask him to stop doing that, then it becomes very difficult for him to continue. So similarly, if you tell a Vaishya that your desire to have a business is a material desire, give it up. That will choke him to death, because for him, doing business is his psychophysical nature. That's his varna. So even with that material desire, he can continue progressing on this path of bhakti towards Krishna. Another example is Arjuna himself. Now, Arjuna had a skill for archery. So if Krishna had said, this is a material desire, give it up, would he be able to function? Similarly, we also have some desires based on our psychophysical natures. We can work with those desires as long as Krishna is our purpose and goal and not the material desires. So that is working with material desires. And the last one is working on material desires. So here, what happens is there are some material desires which may not be ideal for our bhakti. There is no way that material desire would come in the way of aiding in our bhakti. So in such cases, we have to work on eliminating those material desires. So the point is, there are 3-level approaches here. So we have to spiritualize our longings. So what does this mean? So we can all, it's a progression. So longing for something from Krishna is at the lowest level. Even if you have this longing, it's okay. So longing for something from Krishna is also okay. But as long as we understand that the purpose eventually should be Krishna. And then the next level is longing for something for the service of Krishna. So this is higher. So here we want to long or we desire something for the service of Krishna. For example, I could start having this longing that I should be able to speak well, I should be able to memorize verses, or maybe I should be able to sing kirtans nicely. So these are longings for something for the service of Krishna. This is definitely a level higher than longing for something from Krishna. Ultimately, we have to reach this point where we long only for Krishna. Longing for Krishna alone is the highest. So some examples I want to give here. At the topmost level are, of course, the gopis. He Radhe Vrajadevike Chalalite, He Nandasuno Lata. So here, the gopis are longing exclusively and only Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also is saying, Mat Prananatha Tusa Eva Naparaha. I don't want anything. You may hurt me, you may beat me, but I just want you, Krishna, nothing else. So that is at the topmost level. What about some other examples from the Bhagavatam? There are 3 examples that I want to mention where this progression is clearly demonstrated. The first example I want to talk about is Diti. So Diti worshipped Krishna for getting someone to kill Indra. So she started off with this level. So longing for something from Krishna. So what did she long from Krishna? She wanted someone to kill Indra. And then finally she got Marut. I don't want to go into the past time, but eventually she got rid of her animosity towards Indra and her longing was only Krishna. So that is one example. Dhruva Maharaj, as we know, he also started by longing for something. He wanted a kingdom much bigger than his grandfather. So that is what he wanted. So longing for something from Krishna, that's how he started. And eventually, when he saw the Lord, he said, Kacham Vichinvam Api Divya Ratnam. So everything is like a broken piece of glass. Like whatever I was desiring is like a broken piece of glass in comparison to you, Krishna. So he immediately gave up this longing for something from Krishna and started longing only Krishna. The last example is Pururava and Urvashi. So in this case also, Pururava was longing for Urvashi from the Lord. And even though the Lord appeared in front of Pururava, the Lord said, I want Urvashi. And then eventually when Urvashi left him, he understood that now he should change or redirect his consciousness towards Krishna. So the point of all these pastimes is that bhakti works magically in terms of purifying us as we slowly evolve through these above stages. So so there's one more point that I don't want to mention here. So longing for something for the service of Krishna and longing for Krishna are the same for pure devotees. But at our level, so for example, the examples that I gave, so if I long for, if I have a desire that I should sing kirtan nicely, for example, right? So it comes in the second category, longing for something for the service of Krishna. But there is a subtle thing here. So even though I'm longing for something for the service of Krishna, I might have some internal expectations that someone should glorify me, someone should praise my singing and so on. So unless I am on that pure platform, that is why there is this categorization. So longing for something for the service of Krishna is lower than longing exclusively for Krishna. So first things first, so connecting with Krishna is far more important than being free from worldly desires. So our focus should not be give up worldly desires, give up our material desires, and so on. First, we should understand the motivation or the attitude behind the desire. But more important than anything else is that Ananya Bhakti factor that I mentioned, where connecting with Krishna is far more important than being free from any worldly desires. So bhakti doesn't have to wait for purity. Bhakti will bring purity, as Chaitanya Charan Prabhu says. So bhakti doesn't have to wait for purity. Bhakti itself will bring purity over a period of time. So this is all some background, but difficult situations are repeatedly mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam, Mahabharata, and so on. So they seem like curses. So Nalakuvera, Manigriva, Ahalya, they were all cursed. And so we will discuss a few pastimes towards the end, but now I'm going to present a framework by which you can understand all of these pastimes. So this is, of course, Parikshit Maharaj, here is Ambarish Maharaj, here's Dhruv Maharaj, and here's Chitraketu, who became Vitrasur later on, and so on. So we'll understand the one common thread between all these pastimes through a framework that we're going to present. So when distress comes in our life, now let's come to our life, right? When distress comes in our life, what happens is somewhere in this line, we will fall, right? So when distress comes in our lives, most of the time, I tend to become resentful first. But in all the examples that I mentioned in the previous slide, they were very, very grateful to the Lord, even though they were in a very distressful position. So I think in the last two chapters that we covered, chapter 18 and chapter 19, I think Vishal Prabhu or someone mentioned that, in fact, there's a verse also that when Parikshit Maharaj was actually cursed, he started becoming grateful. He became grateful to the sages because he felt that the sages were coming to help him in this last phase of his life. He was not resentful at all. So the first understanding is whenever we are in a distressful position, we should not look at just the bad. We must look for the good around the bad. And we'll elaborate this more. But for now, please remember that the first thing is that we must look for the good around the bad and not focus just on the bad. If Parikshit Maharaj had just focused on the curse, he would not have heard the Bhagavatam and elevated his consciousness and so on. He focused on the good around the bad. And so that's the first thing. Now, in our case, what happens is, so we have certain expectations, and then there is reality. So when distressful situations come in our life, we start become becoming very resentful. We start becoming very resentful of reality, and becoming resentful of reality hurts more than the reality itself. Now, what does that mean? So when I become resentful, most of my energy goes in dealing with the resentment, and less of my energy goes in dealing with the problem that I have to face. So there are two sides to this. So one is we become extremely rigid, that this is what I want, this is my expectation, and this is how it should be. And sometimes what can happen is, because we are so much rigid and holding on to the expectations, the reality starts going further and further away. And because of this, we become very distressed. So what we should do is, we should try to become flexible and sometimes get rid of these expectations. If we get rid of those expectations and move more closer to reality, then we will become more peaceful, more happy, and so on. And we'll be able to deal with the problem at hand also. So insanity, it is said, is a huge gap between expectation and reality. So people become insane when there's a huge gap between what they expect and what is reality. Again, so flexibility means giving up those expectations and dealing with reality. This is what great souls do. So another quote is that we can't always be grateful for all the situations that are given to us, but we can be grateful in all situations. So what does this mean? So for example, let's take Parikshit Maharaj again. So when Shringi cursed him, he cannot be grateful for that particular situation, but he was grateful in that situation. I hope this makes sense. And now with this background, we are ready to present the framework. So typically, when things start happening to us, when events happen, so immediately our mind places those events within what is called a causal context or a frame of reference. There are two things that the mind immediately starts doing. The first thing it says is, hey, why did this happen? And the second thing it says is, what can be done about it? And so this is called a frame of reference. And all of us, whether we observe it or not, whether we like it or not, the mind immediately asks these two questions as soon as we see something happen. So now the same event can be placed in different frames of reference. Now the frame of reference shapes meaning and purpose. So I'm going to give you some examples. I'll start with some very, very simple examples. I'll share some personal examples of Radha Kripa in our lives, how this has helped me and so on. So the first, I just want to talk about a very, very simple example. So let's say somebody's feeling cold. Let's say I'm feeling cold. Okay, so that's an event. It's a physical event. So there are several frames of reference or causal references that I can put this one event into. So the mind immediately starts thinking. The first frame of reference could be, my clothes are not warm enough. Then I could think that the windows of this house are not shut properly. Or I could think, hey, it's winter, that's why it's cold. Or I could think, this part of the world is very cold. Or I could think, because of the climate change. Or finally, I could say, distress is part of the material existence, and that's why I'm cold. So if I pick any one of these frames of reference, which is typically what we do, we don't try to, first of all, contemplate on all the different frames of reference. And that's the first thing that I want to focus on today, is that we should try and contemplate on the different frames of reference which could have caused a particular event. So let's say I focus on any one of these. So, and then there'll be a purpose immediately. So the mind, there are two things. One is, why did this happen? And what can I do about it? So it picks one of these things typically, and then it starts acting on it, right? So for example, if you pick clothes are not warm, immediately the purpose becomes put on a sweater. Or if the frame of reference I pick is windows not shut fully, then fix the windows as soon as possible. If I pick the frame of reference as winter, cold country, then the purpose becomes I just have to tolerate. If I pick climate change as my frame of reference, then make more eco-friendly choices. So I hope you're understanding the basic framework here, that there are several causal boxes that we can put any event into. So now, this is not always good, this frame of reference model. Sometimes it can disempower also. And this is where it leads to depression, distress, and so on. So this is a true example of a waitress who was carrying a glass of water and slipped out and fell. And she eventually ended up being in a hospital for depression, right? So now, how could this happen? So the frame of reference, the causal boxes that she started putting this particular event were actually very destructive. So let's understand with this example itself. The first thing is, oh no, this glass slipped out of my hand. So that's the event. Now, what are the negative causal boxes that you can put this into? So she put this into, I can't even hold a glass. I'm too weak. I'm worthless. I'm good for nothing. So these are all causal boxes which are negative, which are unhealthy, and which can actually pull you down, right? So in that same example, what could be the constructive causal boxes? So she dropped the glass of water. So what can be the constructive causal boxes that she can put this event into? So the first thing is, of course, this is the event. Oh no, the glass slipped out of my hand. So then she could say, washed glasses are slippery. So because of that, the glass slipped out of my hand. The next level could be, some customers call out for waiter very rudely and badly. And that is why probably because of that anxiety, it slipped out of my hand. That part of the floor where I fell is uneven. That's why I slipped and fell. Or here's another causal box, which is constructive, which says, I am not the best person for such physical work. It's better if I find something else that will help me. So these are all healthy causal boxes. So I hope you're following along about how the same event, that there can be multiple causal boxes, one destructive, one constructive. So in our own personal case, when our disabled daughter was identified when she was 19 weeks in the womb, Radha Kripa was identified. So we could have put in several unhealthy causal boxes. So I could have said, oh no, my daughter has congenital heart disease and she'll be disabled throughout her life. That is the event. I'm cursed in this life. That is one negative causal box. Bad things happen to good people. I've not done anything bad, but bad things are happening to me. Why? Why are bad things happening to me? Next causal box, I'm a bad person. And finally, I could even come to this conclusion that God does not exist. Everything happens by chance, and I'm not going to be worshiping God anymore. So these are unhealthy causal boxes that we could easily put this particular event into. Now, what are the healthy causal boxes? Healthy causal boxes, again, so she's a special child. Due to her past karma, she's experiencing what she is right now. Krishna wants me to take on more responsibility, and that is why he's given us this particular daughter. This is a healthy causal box. She does not want to be affected by the material allurements, attractions of this world. Janma Aishwarya Shrutashri. And that is why she's born. Another healthy causal box. And I pray to Krishna in gratitude for giving me an opportunity to take care of this special child. So these are all healthy causal boxes. So now knowledge helps me place my situation in the right causal box. And most importantly, spiritual knowledge will really help me understand the ultimate meaning of all meanings. Okay, so we need to make meaning out of events that happen in our lives. So in one sense, the minds that we have are meaning manufacturing machines. Any event that happens in our life, immediately it starts manufacturing meanings. It happened because of this, it happened because of this, it happened because of this. And because of that, sometimes it could pull you down, or it could elevate you based on your spiritual knowledge. And that is where the knowledge helps. So whenever something happens, there are multiple levels of causes. So we have to be careful not to just completely be fixed on one of those causes. And in the previous case, in all the unhealthy causal boxes, it's mostly all about you, right? Like in the previous case that I explained, it was all about me. Why is this happening to me? I'm a bad person, and so on. But in this case, it's not about me at all, because it's a healthy causal box. So now what does this mean? So now there are two things here. There is event, and then there is meaning. So the event and meaning are separate. Many times we start to think that the meaning is actually intrinsic to an event. So what do I mean by this? So things happen to us at the physical level where the event occurs. But at the mental level is where we start constructing the meanings. And then there is another level, which is the spiritual level, where we as conscious beings exist. So at the physical level is where the event happens. The more we start thinking that the meaning and the event are the same, the more the burden we have to deal with. Because now we have to deal with the physical event level, and we also have to deal with the mental event level. But the more we separate the two, then we have to deal with just the reality, and how to deal with the meaning is separate. Okay. So now the next thing is, so what happens when we start putting events repeatedly in unhealthy causal boxes? If we start putting things in unhealthy causal boxes all the time, then whenever any event happens, even if some good event happens, the mind gravitates towards our default frames of reference and the concomitant meanings. So what does this mean? So if we have been putting in unhealthy causal boxes, even if a good event happens, our mind will automatically find an unhealthy causal box and put it in that particular causal box. So I hope I'm making sense here. So I'll just explain causal boxes at a very broad level with one practical example. Supposing someone becomes sick with malaria. So the immediate cause could be because they're exposed to a mosquito. Now, exposed to a mosquito could be the correct cause, but is it the complete cause? I would say no, because let's say there are 2 or 3 people in the house, but only one person gets malaria. So why didn't the other person get it? So the reason is there could be another cause, which is the remote cause, which is our past karma. And then there is the ultimate cause, which is the material consciousness itself. We are here in this material world because of our forgetfulness of Krishna. So that could be the ultimate cause. And all these 3 causes will have 3 solutions. The immediate solution when I'm sick with malaria is that I have to take the right medicines. The remote cause, which is based on karma, is that, okay, because of bad karma, I've gotten this disease. I should make sure that I don't accrue any more bad karma. And the ultimate solution is remembrance of Krishna. So if somebody gets a disease like malaria, and you ask a devotee, and the devotee says, oh, you just have to chant the holy names. In one sense, that solution is correct, because it is the ultimate solution. But we cannot neglect the immediate solution at all. We have to take the right medicines. So we have to work with both the immediate solution and the ultimate solution, and not neglect one or the other. Or if we just focus only on the immediate solution, then that may also be not correct. For example, there are many people who take medicines and still it does not work for them. So in that time, we can escalate. Okay, I'm taking the medicines, it's not working for me, maybe because it's because of my bad karma. And because of that, I should be more careful to not accrue any more bad karma and so on. So we should not escalate unnecessarily. And I'll give you more examples of this. So I mentioned, medicine does not always work for everyone. Right? We discussed this. So we are spiritual beings. but at a material level. So we are prone to distress. We are eternal beings and we are seeking pleasure in temporary things. This is a spiritual understanding that we must always keep in our background. So now let's take some more examples. When not to escalate causal boxes and when to escalate. So the first example is that, let's say it is a cold night and someone eats a lot of ice cream. And what happens next day? Next day morning, they get up and then they start screaming, I have a sore throat. I have a sore throat. And it's because of is it because of the past karma? It is actually because of their past night's karma. It's not because of the past karma, it's because of the past night's karma. So we need immediate attention here. So what is the immediate solution here? It is because of poor decision-making and self-control, lack of self-control, that we ate this ice cream. So we cannot escalate this and say it's because of my past karma. So that is one example. So when in certain situations where we have to deal with it, we have to deal with it at the immediate level itself. Let's take one more example. This one is interesting. The baby cries. So baby cries, if the mother says, hey, the baby is crying because of its past karma. Again, we are escalating it by neglecting our immediate responsibility. So if a mother says it's due to your past karma and neglects the immediate responsibility, then that is a wrong way of escalating causal boxes. And the next example is where you will see the other side. So someone has never smoked, okay? And they're taking very good care of their health and still they develop lung cancer. So they've taken very good care of their health, nothing they've done wrong, they've been eating healthy, and still they get lung cancer. It is in such cases that you have to escalate and pick the next level and say that this is because of my past karma. So this is the time where we should escalate, because putting it in this box at this time is actually the most empowering thing that you can do. So again, we have to identify several causal boxes. First of all, contemplate on the several causal boxes and pick that causal box which will empower you, which is healthy, which is constructive, and so on. So what is the lesson now? So whenever an event happens, we have to place it in the most constructive or empowering causal box. Sometimes that could mean you have to deal with it in the immediate sense, or sometimes it could also mean just accept it because of our past karma. So many times when we see others suffering or doing something wrong, we should not ask the question, it's because of their karma, but we should ask, what is our dharma? That is the first thing that we should ask. Not what is their karma, but what is our dharma. So the personal example again. So if we could easily think that, okay, it's Radha Kripa's previous karma and ignore our dharma, right? So, but Nitya, she's so divine that she completely has taken it as her dharma to do whatever she can to help Radha Kripa reach her true potential. So that way, she's not just neglecting her responsibilities. So as I mentioned previously, escalation of this particular situation can lead to being irresponsible. So spiritual knowledge helps us widen the screen and also provides us such a causal box. So what is interesting is there is not one example in the Mahabharata, in the Ramayana, or any place where someone is suffering and someone else says it's because of your karma. There's not one example like that. Okay, so with this, I just want to give some 3 practical tips, and then I'll explain how Srila Prabhupada applied them. So the 3 things are, you can remember the acronym ACE, A-C-E. I mentioned some of them before, but I'll repeat them again. So whenever bad things happen to us, look for the good around the bad. So don't just look at the bad. If you just keep looking at only the bad, then there's a tendency to put it in an unhealthy causal box. The example is, of course, in Bhagavatam, Parikshit Maharaj, as we discussed already, he looked for the good around the bad. Shringi cursed him, but he looked for good around the bad. He was grateful for the situation and so on. So in real life, let's say someone loses a job. So you must look for the good around that particular event. So for example, there are so many other things that could be going right for you. You have a lot of contacts, you have a supportive family, you have qualifications, you have skills, and so on. So look for the good around the bad. Don't just focus on the bad. And this is where, at the spiritual level, it really helps us that our existence is not limited to just the body, right? So something could have happened at the physical level, but I'm more than my body. If you just understand this, then in one sense, whatever bad happens to us at the bodily level, we can easily look for the good around the bad. Another way that I like to look at this is that Bhagavad Gita explains that in our multi-life journey, our present life is just like one sentence in a book. So if you just take one sentence in the book, and in that sentence it is said that the hero got hurt really bad, and then we think, oh, what use is this? The hero is getting hurt and so on. But that's just one sentence in the entire book. The entire book will have thousands of sentences. Similarly, in our multi-life journey, we have millions of lifetimes. So we can't just take this one present life and think that, oh, why is this happening to me? So look for the good around the bad. So that's the first practical tip. And we will see this later, how Srila Prabhupada applied it in his life. The next practical tip is C. So C is look for the good to counter the bad. So what does this mean? So here, among all the good things that you've seen around the bad, pick one good thing that will help you counter the bad that you're going through right now. So in the case of Dhruva Maharaj, when he was insulted, he looked for the good around the bad in the sense that he ran to his mother Suniti, because he felt that by going to Suniti, she would help him understand or counter the bad. So that is the example to counter the bad. And the last one is look for the good that will emerge from the bad. So we need to play our part. Whenever bad things happen, we need to play our part, but we need to go through it also sometimes. We need to go through that painful situation. We have to persevere through it. And this is the time where devotional spirituality is necessary. Even when you're going through that pain, if you can ask Krishna, how can I serve you, Krishna, in this present condition? That is where it becomes the most empowering, and you'll start seeing a lot of good things emerge. So the classic example that I want to share, and then we will stop after this, is Srila Prabhupada's life. Now, Srila Prabhupada's life, when Srila Prabhupada came to America, actually even before that, when he was in the Jaladuta, so he wrote this Markine Bhagavad Dharma, the famous poem. So, Boro Kripa Koile Krishna Adha Mera Prati Kilagiya Nileheta Koro Ebe Gati. Boro Kripa Koile Krishna Adha Mera Prati. So it is so interesting that Srila Prabhupada is saying here that thank you, Krishna, for the mercy that you're giving me. You're so kind to shower your mercy upon this useless soul. Now, if you look at that present situation of Srila Prabhupada at that time, everything was going wrong for him. He was 70 years old. He had no followers. He had no support from any institution. He did not even know who's going to pick him up when he lands in Boston. And the only asset that he had was his body. And even that was falling apart. He had 2 heart attacks. Now, what is going on here? And why is Srila Prabhupada writing about mercy? Where is the Kripa? Where is the Kripa? So Srila Prabhupada was not looking at all the bad, but he was looking for the good around the bad. So what is the good? He felt grateful that he is able to follow the instructions of his spiritual master, and he felt grateful that he had Srimad Bhagavatam with him. So he was looking for the good around the bad. So the next thing is the C. C is look for the good to counter the bad. So in the same poem, Markine Bhagavad Dharma, Srila Prabhupada incorporated several Bhagavatam verses from the second chapter of the first canto. So one of them is the famous verse, Shrimatam Swakata Krishna, Punya Shravana Kirtana, Hridyantasto hi Badrani, Vidunuti Surikshitam. So here, what Srila Prabhupada is referring to is translated as Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma in everyone's heart and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. Srila Prabhupada explained later on that this verse provided him so much shelter because he knew that with Bhagavatam, he could counter the bad. With Bhagavatam, he knew that if he were to just speak the Bhagavatam, if he were to just hear the Bhagavatam, he could counter all the bad. And as the poem continues, it is said, Bhagavater Katha te taba avatar dhirahaya shunya jadi kane bar bar. So just taking shelter of Bhagavatam, I'll be able to counter all the bad things. So this is look for the good to counter the bad. And last thing is look for the good that will emerge from the bad. In the same poem, Srila Prabhupada says, Nachao nachao Prabhu, nachao semate, kashtera puttali jati, nachao semate. So the translation is, I am just like a puppet in your hands. So if you have brought me here to dance, then make me dance. Make me dance, O Lord, make me dance as you like. So what emerged? 108 temples. Srila Prabhupada wrote over 70 books, went around the globe 14 times, and inspired thousands and thousands of people at that time, and now millions actually. Millions of people, he elevated their consciousness, he brought them closer to Krishna, and so on. So the final lesson I want to share is that be grateful and serve Krishna in the difficult situations also, and then all good will emerge. Sometimes when we are going through difficulties, it's hard to understand why those things are happening. So we look at the present and plan the future, but Krishna looks at the future and plans our present. So I'm almost out of time, so I'll just summarize the 4 things about the frame of reference. The first thing is, remember that meaning is not intrinsic to an event. Recognize the frame of reference that is being used currently. Typically, as I said, we pick only one frame of reference. But the third thing is the various available frames of references also have to be contemplated. And then we have to choose the frame of reference that is most empowering. So I'll stop here, but here are some Bhagavatam pastimes, and I'll request any one of you to unmute and say what frame of reference. You could talk in terms of immediate, remote, and ultimate, or you could talk in terms of what exact frame of reference that you think the particular character chose in each of these pastimes. So this first pastime is Parikshit Maharaj being cursed by Shringi. Does anybody want to take a guess? What frame of reference could this be?
It's the immediate, right?
Yes. How, Prabhu? Can you explain immediate how?
I mean, that is the immediate cause, direct cause. I mean, yeah. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Anyone else? Let's see. Anybody else?
Prabhuji, looking for good around the bad.
Looking for good around the bad. So
As you mentioned, yeah.
Yes, Nupur, that's correct. And this, I kind of mentioned this also. So looking for good around the bad. So he started looking for the good things around the bad in the sense that he didn't look at the immediate thing at all, because if he had looked at just the immediate thing, he would have just counter-cursed. He would have counter-cursed Shringi or done things at the immediate level. but he took it as an arrangement of the Lord. So he took it as a remote cause or the ultimate cause, and he started working on that. So that is this particular pastime. The next one is Ambarish Maharaj. So how did he take it? So Ambarish Maharaj here is cursed by Durvas Muni to be killed by a demon. And eventually, in the end, we see the Durvas Muni falling at the feet of Ambarish Maharaj. So what is the causal frame of reference that Ambarish Maharaj is using here? Is it immediate? Is it remote? Is it ultimate? Or is it anything else?
It is ultimate, Prabhuji.
Yes, Krishna Prabhu. Yeah, how is it ultimate?
Because he immediately surrenders, saying that if that is the wish of the Lord, then that is what should happen to him.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. So that's what, so in this particular case, he escalated the causal reference boxes and he immediately went to the ultimate level. So he said that, okay, I've done my part, now there's nothing more that I can do at the immediate level. So I'm going to escalate it and I'm going to go to the source of all meaning, which is the Lord himself. And that is why he went to the ultimate level. The next pastime is Dhruv Maharaj. So Dhruv Maharaj was insulted, and this is slightly difficult. So now what happens here? Of course, we know how this pastime ends. Lord Vishnu gives darshan to Dhruv Maharaj. So how do we understand this? Anybody?
Ruji, I think it's immediate.
How is it immediate, Mataji?
Because he finds immediate shelter, which is his mother.
Yes. So in this particular case, that's the correct answer, because he finds immediate shelter, which is his mother, but his mother escalates it. His mother escalates it to the ultimate cause. And then she tells that if you want a kingdom bigger than your great-grandfather, you must go to the ultimate shelter, which is Krishna. So she guided him towards Krishna. And the last one is Chitraketu Maharaj. So here, Chitraketu was cursed by Mother Parvati. How did he react? Did he take immediate steps, remote steps, or ultimate steps?
Ultimate steps. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Vamsidhar Gopal Prabhu.
Yeah, so ultimate step, Prabhu. I mean, he humbly accepted like the curse given by Parvati Mata,
Yes.
and considered it for like ultimate good.
Yes, it is so interesting that here we see Vritrasura. Vritrasura, even though Indra won the war, the Vritrasura was actually the winner in this particular case because he went through a lot of pain. So it is said in the Bhagavatam that it took Indra 360 days to sever the neck from the body of Vritrasura. So 360 days, Vritrasura was suffering. And it is mentioned that every moment he was just thanking the Lord. Every moment he was grateful. Because the ultimate point is that in that extreme pain is where you can completely fill your consciousness with Krishna. It sounds counterintuitive, but in that extreme pain is when you can absorb yourself completely in Krishna. And that is why they're grateful. Why are devotees grateful when they're put in difficulties? Because they know that in that extreme pain that they're going through is where they can completely absorb themselves, remember Krishna all the time. So with this, I'll stop sharing. And if anybody has any questions or comments or criticisms, please feel free to share. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Yes, Krishna Prabhu, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, such an amazing class. I think I needed this class. There is so much for me to, I'm going to listen to it again and again. But I have a question for you. I have multiple questions, but I think I'll ask only one because I'll let others ask. So you said that if somebody gets, let's say some malaria and then they say this is, and then they can take a medicine or they can say this is Krishna's wish and not do anything and just worship to Krishna. But you said that that's the wrong thing to do.
I didn't say that that's wrong, but I said that some cases both may be needed. So if somebody says just chant the holy names and don't take the medicines.
Right. So
Then,
just chant, just chant the holy names and don't take the medicine will be, they could be causing harm to themselves.
Exactly, that's the point.
By doing that. Now, why is that not optimum, or why is that wrong? Why is
because we are not at that level yet. So if we are at that level of a pure devotee level, then if something happens to us, then we can take complete shelter of Krishna and this won't bother us. But are we at that level yet? Are we at that level where we can say, I'm not going to take any medicines and I'm just going to leave it completely on Krishna? Are we at that level? So we have to understand where we are and then act accordingly. So if we are at that level, then it makes sense. Then what you're saying makes sense. Then we can say, okay, of course, they won't say this, they're at that level. So in one sense, whatever happens at the bodily level, it won't even affect them. But because we are not at that level, we have to slowly take baby steps. So we take the medicines and pray to Krishna and slowly elevate. So get to that point of that Ananya Bhakti completely, like the gopis, like get to that point, but we are not at that point yet. So that is the reason, Prabhu. I hope that answers.
It does. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Kamesha Prabhu, you had your hand raised, I think. Oh, Samaksh, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Very nice class, Prabhuji, and thank you for sharing so many personal topics in this lecture. I have one question. In this lecture, as well as many lectures which I have heard, many speakers say that Krishna will never give you an exam which you will fail, right? So I just have this question that does Krishna gives difficult exam to the devotees to test them, or the problems are about to come anyways, and being Krishna consciousness helps us to tackle those problems?
Yeah, so another good question, Samaksh Prabhu. So basically what happens is in our journey towards Krishna, so Krishna is a person, okay? So Krishna gives us problems which he knows that we can pass, but the problems at our level. So either we pass and go one step closer to Krishna, or we fail and stay at the same level. But he doesn't give a person like me a very difficult problem which he knows is way beyond my level. Does that answer your question? So it's step by step. Yeah. And then, so what we should do from our side is that we must keep praying that Krishna, please show me the next step in my life so that I can go closer to him. And then you will see through someone or some event in your life, that next step will be presented to you. Whether you pass it or fail it is in your hands. You have to sometimes come out of that sense of complacency or whatever it may be. You have to come out of that and you have to extend yourself and take that step towards Krishna. Then you would have passed that test, and then again, repeat the same cycle again. So never become complacent, but you have to keep on taking these steps towards Krishna, and eventually you will get there. I hope that answers.
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. And Manan Prabhu?
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Prabhu. It's a well-researched, well-prepared class.
Whatever I presented today is just a copy-paste from several devotees, so I don't want to take any credit. Yes, please.
So I also have several questions. Let me ask one. So you said that in response to distress, one may be somewhere on the scale from being resentful to being grateful.
Yes.
So I would like to hear from you the importance of mourning when one experiences some loss in their life. it's not resentful, it's not grateful. So is it helpful? What way is helpful? What way could be harmful?
So if we lose someone in our lives, so now in that case, it is an event that has happened. So the first thing is we have to put it in the immediate context. Okay. So immediately we can't put it in the ultimate context and say that, okay, this person has lost his life. It's a soul, and I'm going to be detached. I'm not going to cry. So we have to be grateful for what that person has done to us. So that way that gratitude comes. And also we must not become cold-hearted. When someone dies who's very close to us, we should not become cold-hearted, but we should become soft-hearted. So we should become so soft-hearted that Krishna comes and steals that soft butter from our heart. If we become cold-hearted, then there's no way Krishna is going to come into our heart. So there is this famous example of two devotees going to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. One of them said that I want to become a sannyasi. My wife just died and I didn't shed one drop of tear. Right? And then Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, go and get married again because you have to cry. So the gratitude part in this case comes at the immediate level itself. You have to be grateful for what that person at the horizontal level did for you. Yeah, I don't see any resentfulness coming here. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Comments?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, can I ask?
Yes, Vamsidhar Gopal Prabhu, Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
And
I really like the point of this, this causal mindset, like we can put into in different situations. And then you explained with Shastri examples and as well as with your personal example. Actually, I also sometimes think that like you and Mataji, the way you are like taking care of Radha Kripa, and like, I mean, seeing her like she has heart issues since so early age, her childhood, and all other health issues, but like you are Mataji, I mean, it's the word you spoke were through like realization and like through your example, I mean, we could understood that how this can be practically implemented in your life. And Prabhu, I would like to understand more about the point you said about that they were not grateful for situation, for something, but grateful in the situation. I mean, I understand a little bit, but I would like to have a little more explanation from you about that. And then I have one more question.
Yes, Prabhu. So let's take any example, Vamshidhar Gopal Prabhu. So for example, let's take a situation where things are not going well at work, or you can come up with, okay, let's say you lost a job or something like that. So you can't be grateful for that situation. You can't be grateful for losing the job. But even in spite of losing that job, you can be grateful in that situation, in the sense that even though this has happened, there are so many things around that can help me progress. So it is said by a famous psychologist that if you are alive, that means there are more right things going on in your life than wrong things. There are more right things that you can be grateful for than wrong things. So just the fact that we are alive means that there are more right things going on in our lives. Just the fact that we are alive, we should be grateful. So that is the understanding. So we can be grateful in all situations, no matter what. And the best part is, if we have the spiritual knowledge, no matter what happens at the material level, we can still be grateful at the spiritual level. So we can still be grateful that we are connected to Krishna, we are connected to devotees, no matter what happens at the bodily level. So that's how we understand that we can be grateful in all situations.
Okay. Yes, Prabhu, makes perfect sense. Thank you. And so I had one question around, Prabhu, like how we can prevent ourselves from putting into wrong that like causal box, or
Yeah.
so if like, for example, you explained around like how something bad can happen to us and how we can take think of situation positively, but like then sometimes we may not be doing something very which is perfect or which is right, and still we are justifying it, thinking of some causal situation that okay, this, like Ravana for example. I mean,
Yeah.
his kids were dying, everything was going wrong, still he was like, okay, I should be like I should be Yodha and Veer, and then should not accept defeat like that. So how can we be sure that okay, the frame of reference of mindset that we are accepting is right in the particular
Yeah,
case?
wonderful. Wonderful question, Prabhu. And I kind of touched upon this, but I didn't elaborate this. But see, the moment you start thinking about yourself, the moment you start thinking about yourself, yeah, and the causal framework that you're set is mostly about you, then you know that it's wrong. Like in the case of Ravana that you gave, you're thinking about himself. Or in the case of the examples that I gave, when you start thinking more about yourself, I am the bad person, I am this, it's all about me, I am weak, I am this. So then it shrinks your consciousness. It does not expand your consciousness. So it expands when you start thinking, becoming selfless. The more selfish you become, you constrict that. So that is where you know when you are putting yourself in an unhealthy causal box. The moment you put yourself in an unhealthy causal box, you will know that it's all about you. It's all about you.
Mhm.
That is one thing that I always think of.
Mhm. Yeah, it's
Hope that helps.
it's like more like we have centered around us and like thinking in like prideful way or like in a selfish way like that.
Yeah, like for example, Durvas Muni, right? So Durvas Muni, he was just thinking about himself. He was thinking that, okay, Ambrish Maharaj completely did not respect me. Ambrish Maharaj should not have had Prasad because I am more senior than him. It's all about me, me, you know. So then it doesn't work. It's an unhealthy frame of reference for Durvas Muni. But on the other side, Ambrish Maharaj had a healthy frame of reference where he escalated it to the highest level. So it's just a nice contrast there.
Nice, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for this answer and amazing class, Prabhu. Everything was
Thank you so
wonderful.
much, Vamsiddhar Gopal Prabhu. We're going to miss you in New Vrindavan. So
Yes, Prabhu. Me too,
we'll
Prabhu.
pray for
Yeah.
you. We'll pray for you.
Thank you. Prabhu. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Yeah, Hare Krishna. Nupur, go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare
First
Krishna.
of all, I would like to thank you for such a wonderful lecture. And I just loved it, like how you stated the simplest as well as most difficult examples, like the situations that have happened, like by giving the root causes of them, and then how you like put the casual boxes, like how can we put ourselves into immediate, or like how can we lead to immediate or immediately or ultimately to Krishna by looking deeper about what is causing the situation. Is it our own past karma, or is it like like taking trying to figure it out, like what caused it, and then motivation being more important than desire, and the kind, like a reason for bhakti, is it for material desire, is it with material desire, or are we working on the material desires? And then sorry, so like thank you so much, Prabhuji. It was such a wonderful lecture. I just relished, it was all nectar for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nupur. And I know it's not easy. We are commuting to work and you're still taking notes and being so attentive. So thank you so much. Appreciate it very much. Thank you. Haribo.
Thank you,
So,
Prabhuji.
next, Krishnan Prabhu.
Prabhuji, if others have questions, I'm happy to go later. But I wanted to think more about the framework a little more, and this is just to expand the thought a little.
Mm-hmm.
So these causal boxes, as the other Prabhuji said, they fall into a spectrum of negative to positive, and these causal boxes, if they are I think you can generalize by saying that if the causal boxes have the self reflect in them, saying then they're negative.
Typically,
and
yeah.
They're typically negative, and if they don't have the self, then they can be the positive. Now the other column that you can add to this is maybe corrective action. What corrective action can you take? Going back to your example of, it is cold. Can I take an action or can I not take an action? And what is the action that I can take in that situation? If the weather, if there's a draft coming through the window, then I can close the window. If I'm feeling cold, I can wear a sweater. So those are the corrective actions. And if the corrective actions become beyond our control, where they are not something that we can manage,
Yes.
then obviously it is best to depend on Krishna and and tolerate.
Yes.
And that could be a line where where the causal actions are above are beyond beyond us, then so that could be the other way of expanding the framework. Just a suggestion, Prabhuji.
Yes, Prabhu. So that is very well said. So as if you remember, I mentioned one point where sometimes we have to deal with the situation and sometimes we have to accept it. And that could be in different situations also. In the immediate sense, we have to deal with it. But in the remote sense, we just have to accept it. So yeah, there's some things beyond us. But when some things are beyond us, we should not start thinking that because it is beyond us, I'm useless. I am, everything is falling apart. That is where these positive causal boxes will help. It's because of my bad karma, and the only way I can deal with it right now is to accept it. And that's a positive way of looking at it. Or if something is falling apart and you start thinking, oh no, everything is falling apart, I'm just completely lost. It's like I'm completely worthless. So these are things that we should avoid. So you're right in that sense. Yes, I think. So.
Yes. And then you also shared the example about somebody, getting depressed.
Yes.
Just because they dropped a glass of water or something like that. And so this is a trap that we can all fall into, by kind of, we are giving, we are attributing the wrong, by attributing the wrong causal box, there is a potential of falling into this trap of negative, of getting into a negative spiral.
Exactly, Prabhu. See, that's what you have a question, or is it?
No, that was more of a comment, but I don't, I think the question is how do you, how can you positively think even when you feel like you're in a negative spiral, which is what, I regularly get into a negative spiral.
Yes.
And how do you stay
here's
out there?
Yeah. So you just mentioned the problem in your question itself. You said you regularly get into a negative spiral. That means what is happening is, in your particular case, whenever an event happens, your mind is going back into that negative causal boxes or unhealthy causal boxes all the time. So we should change that, is what I'm saying. We should change that and start contemplating. And the first way to change is contemplate all the causal boxes, boxes, and put it in a healthy thing. And the more you practice this, the more you start practicing putting in healthy causal boxes, the more your mind will stop going into those unhealthy causal boxes. It's actually a trick of the mind that to put in this unhealthy causal box repeatedly. So yeah,
makes sense, Prabhu. I think it's a question of practice.
Yes, it's a question of practice.
It's a question of yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. That was very useful.
And contemplation also, Prabhuji. Contemplation also, one thing for me, in that immediate moment, you may not be able to think about it, but at least later, when you have some time, think about all the causal boxes and then put it in the right causal box and then follow on the purpose of that causal box. And that will help.
Yes, it makes sense.
Thank you.
Makes sense, Prabhu. Thank you.
Nitya, next.
Hare Krishna. So in the initial slides where you're talking about the progression from desiring from Krishna to desire in service of Krishna, or desire ultimately desire for Krishna.
Yes.
You mentioned that if we desire in service of Krishna, for example, I need to give a good class, or I need to chant or
longing for
kirtans.
something in the service of Krishna. Yeah.
Longing for service. So that middle part where longing for something in service of Krishna could also be a little bit, deceiving, thinking that I want to give a better class so that I appear to be the best person
Yes.
among the lot, or I could, of course it is for the pleasure of Krishna, but then the mood with which we desire also, or the long also, is it's difficult to differentiate sometimes. In terms of, okay, I'm doing it in service of Krishna, but what is the ultimate motive inside that? Because it really that is.
Yeah, wonderful point. So that is why I said that for pure devotees, longing for something in the service of Krishna and longing for Krishna are pretty much the same. But for people at our level, we should clearly question our intent and why we are longing for something in the service of Krishna. Are we longing it for our own praise or something like that? Or are we longing it purely for Krishna? But this level is in the middle, which is better than longing for something from Krishna. So it is definitely better than that, but it is not the best in the sense that longing completely for Krishna. So yeah, so even there, because at our level, we can fake it actually. And okay, I'm getting this nice kirtan, I'm giving these nice classes, but still I'm expecting that praise within. So that is where
it's very subtle.
Very
so
subtle.
To say.
So and only nobody else will know this. Only Krishna will know this, because he will be able to know the motive or the attitude or the motivation for your actions. So you can cheat the whole world, but you can't cheat the ultimate cheater.
What I'm saying is like how to be more aware of this. How do we, be better at it? So that's
question your motives. Question your motives. The intent is very important, more important than the content actually. So the intent, content, and consequence are three things. The intent is important and more important than the content. Like let's say you sing nicely, give nice classes or whatever. And then the consequence is based on the content, but the most important thing here is the intent, which is what Krishna really looks for. And that is where he's like in Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam, right? He looks at the intent, not the content. He does not looking at the content, what you're giving me, but what is the intent by which you're giving it to me.
Okay.
So,
and I have just one other question. This follow-up from Vamsida Gopal Prabhu's question about Ambarish Maharaj. So you mentioned that Durvas Muni has an he wanted to be glorified. He wanted Ambarish Maharaj to wait for him to have finished the fasting, right? So it was you can clearly distinguish between it is an ultimate desire or is his own self-desire. Yes. But same can be said to Ambarish Maharaj as well, because I know that Ambarish Maharaj is a devotee and all that, but ultimately why he broke the fast is because he wouldn't want to miss out a chance on getting the benefit of the year-long fasting. Okay. So it is for his own ultimate, I mean, like it is also his own desire. If he really truly cared for that guest who's come as, Durvas Muni, he could have said, okay, it's okay to forego the results of my, year-long fasting because I want to please my guest, so I don't want to even drink of water. So that would have put him in a really better situation. I don't know.
Yeah. So here, the actual pastime, and the Acharya has actually explained this, that Ambarish Maharaj, with a drop of a hat, it's easily, he could have just said, I'm going to forego all these things that I've done. I'm going to completely fast until Durvas Muni comes. But what happened was, our Acharya has explained that Vishnu came in the form of a sage to orchestrate this whole pastime. And the sage convinced Ambarish Maharaj to have the drop of water, just to break the pride of Durvas Muni. So that is the complete pastime. Ambarish Maharaj was not too attached to getting the fruits of that particular austerity that he was doing. So, but Lord Vishnu wanted to glorify Ambarish Maharaj and shatter the pride of Durvas Muni through this pastime. So he came in the form of a sage and convinced Ambarish Maharaj that you can just drink a little bit of water. You know, it's not breaking the fast, but still it's breaking the fast. So Ambarish Maharaj was convinced that this sage is telling him all this. There's a nice discussion that happens between them. And then Ambarish Maharaj actually drinks that water. It was not because of his selfish reasons at all. He was just following the words of a sage.
Okay. Thank you.
Hari Bol. Jitendra Prabhu, and then we can end after that.
Hare Krishna. Sorry, my attention was divided between many things. So forgive me for my stupid answers.
No.
But this was amazing. It checks all the boxes that Chaitanya Charan Prabhu would want in his class. Relevant, thoroughly analytical, with personal as well as Shastric examples and contemporary examples in like the ones you gave about Prabhupada. So yeah, overall a wonderful class. I listened to it again to grasp the concepts better. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jitendra Prabhu, and thank you for attending in spite of having to deal with Prithu and other things. So thank you so much. So thank you all, dear devotees. So we'll continue next week. Grantraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyev patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Hari Bol. Hare Krishna.
His Grace Gaur Kumar Prabhu ki jai.
Jai.